Welcome back to the Garden with Joe and Holly radio show. Thank you for being part of the program today. If you got a question, send it on over. It's Garden Talk. It's Garden in Question Answer time. You got a question, send it on over to gardentalkradio@gmail.com. That's gardentalkradio@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to give us a call, you can certainly do that to 1-800-927-SHOW. That's 1-800-927-7469. This question here, Holly, is sponsored by Fleet Farm and fleetfarm.com.
In your opinion, what is the best houseplant you can buy?
In your opinion, Holly, what is it? I think it's the snake plant or the mother-in-law plant.
Okay, I have my own opinion.
Okay.
So why do you think that?
It's very versatile. It's very simplistic. You don't have to do a whole lot to it. It's part of the succulent family, so you don't need to water it except for about every 2 weeks or maybe once a month based on the humidity level in your house. They come in. There's a variety of different variations of the snake plant, mother-in-law's tongue plant. There's about 70 species and genres formerly known as, they've changed the name a couple of times, but about 70 different species of it. 70 to 90 degrees in your house, sandy soil. So if you're planting it, you're going to want a cacti mix, and average humidity, grows in shade to partial shade. So you don't need direct sunlight. And it's a very unique up vertical plant. It's not going to drop over or cascade out of the pot. And there's a couple of different characteristics and colors in which you can get.
So I like the Calathea plant. It looks like it's a little bit more tropical looking. There's a lot of different varieties. It's called a prayer plant. It opens and closes to the daylight, responses to the daylight.
Like a flower.
Not a flower. The leaves just kind of
I know, but flowers will open and close.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had one working in the office, and then I brought it home.
And it died.
I think it missed
it was too bright.
I think it missed its little ecosystem.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I'm going to buy another one, and I know I will have success with it. I won't be moving it back and forth to the office, but yeah, I like the Calathea plant. It was super easy to care for. I watered once a week on a little schedule, and it just was beautiful, and it was fun, and I would recommend that kind of plant. But mother-in-law tongue I know is really popular. I think the best thing is to, maybe figure out where you want to put this plant that you're purchasing, and then go from there. And
don't overbuy. Don't go, well, I can get 3. Just start with 1.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
So another question we have is from Alon, our friend, Alona.
From listening to us on WAAM 1600 AM, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
So Alona writes in, I was wondering about my Granny Smith apple tree. It's a tall semi-dwarf, looks very healthy, has grown a lot, especially after the deer ate it down a year ago, but has not established any blossoms yet. The tree is about 5-ish years old and has about 6 feet tall. I'm guessing that it will not need nitrogen. And then she talks about the soil test.
Uh-huh.
The tree did have a bad case of aphids this spring, but I took care of that. The tree looks healthy. Then she showed me her soil test. She has for the 2 apple trees, the Macintosh and then the green apple. So it looks like the lack of fruit is likely due to the absence of flowers is either poor pollination or low temperature during bloom.
Yeah.
That's a lot of problems with a lot of apple trees. The other problem with apple trees is that even though it's a dwarf tree and it should bear fruit within 5 years, sometimes it does take longer, especially when it went through a shock with deer eating it and possible aphids. So it might just take longer for it to establish blooms and then actually fruit. So that is a problem as well.
Well, the bloom thing, because we've seen this in orchards that, you're going to get, that's why, the peach crop is terrible this year. The orange crop is terrible because they had a cold snap or a frost or a freeze as the blooms were blossoming. And the big orchards, and I don't know how practical this is or if it even exists anymore, but I remember growing up where you would hear stories that the orchard would either have giant burn barrels throughout and there would be a staff that would go all night and keep these barrels burning, or they would rent helicopters and fly over it all night long to keep the air disturbed so there wouldn't be any frost or moisture landing on the leaves and freezing those blossoms off. Now, that was 25, 30 years ago. That's a big, having helicopters fly around, there's some money there. Having the burn barrels, probably not so much. A truck full of wood and a couple of friends to keep the heat going, to keep the frost from landing on the blossoms.
Right. Yeah, so there's a lot of things there.
And the shock with all these other things has pushed back that production.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there that could cause these problems. And especially dwarf or semi-dwarf apple trees, yes, they could possibly bear fruit sooner, but sometimes they do take, that full time. So
sometimes it takes women years to have a baby.
Right.
Same thing kind of with plants and a distant correlation or comparison, I guess.
Yeah.
Canning question here.
Yeah, so let's move on to the canning question. Oh, and she did send in her soil test she had done, and it explained kind of what she can do if she needs to for that soil, but it looks like based on that, I think the soil looked pretty good. All right, so the canning question is, I just saw your video on reprocessing jars. If they don't seal, I'm just curious how long we would have to reprocess if we needed to. We would have to reprocess if we needed to. We're new to canning, so I just want to make sure I gather as much information as I can. Thank you, Samantha. Samantha, thank you for your question. If you want to reprocess it at the same time for originally stated. So if the original recipe says to can it for 30 minutes, you'd reprocess it for 30 minutes. And I can explain the reprocessing.
Yes, go ahead.
Reprocessing process. So what you're going to do is, once you've established that jar has not sealed, is you can just usually leave it like on the counter or whatever until it cools down, or until the next day. You just want to make sure that it's like at room temperature.
Don't hit the top, because then it's going to seal and you're going to have a false seal. Take and tap the side, and if it shifts across the lid or across the jar, it's not sealed.
There you go. That's a helpful tip. So once you've established that it's not going to seal, then you want to make sure it's room temperature. Then you take your canner itself and you put water in it at room temperature. You put the jars in there while you let the water come to the boil, and then that's when you start the timer. So you could do this if you're doing pint jars. You could actually, if it's just like 1 or 2 pint jars, you could do this in a small stock pot, as long as you can cover those jars
with at least 1 inch of water.
1 inch of water, or you can just use your regular canner. But that is what you want to do, and then once it becomes that full roaring boil, then you would start your timer for 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it may be, and then you would reprocess those jars that way.
Would not recommend doing this with pickles, because pickles are heat sensitive, and the more heat you put to them, the more mushier they can become. Even with the stabilization of the different powders in which you can add to these.
Right. Pickles are one. Cucumber pickles. If it's some other type of pickle,
I think zucchini would probably be the same way.
Yeah. And then also jam. Jam might change the consistency of that when you reprocess it. So things like that you can just put in your fridge and make sure you eat within a couple months. Otherwise, you can reprocess most other things.
Another thing, please stop doing this. And I know I'm going to lose listeners, but stop doing this, turning your jars upside down to get them to seal. We're seeing this on social media now all the time.
Okay. Yep. Absolutely. So then we have another question that came in from a friend of mine, and she was just wondering, she saw on wherever on social media that these people were chopping up their zucchini and just freezing it directly because they were going to put it in soups and or possibly making zucchini bread later on down the, in the winter or whatever. And some of them were, running through a food processor, so it became more of like a zucchini bread consistency, or again, they were just chopping it for soup, since zucchini gets cooked up in soup and it's going to be kind of mushy anyway. And she just wanted to know, is that the best way to do it? And that she'd traditionally been taught to any vegetable you're going to freeze to blanch it. And there's nothing wrong with freezing zucchini once you've put it through a food processor or you've chopped it, but just know once you pull it out of the freezer, it is going to be mushy.
Yeah, mushy. Yeah.
So if you, and any vegetable will be mushy.
I guess peppers is one of the exceptions. Peppers don't get as mushy because you can just chop and throw them out in the freezer. You don't need to blanch them or anything. Peppers kind of hold their firmness to a certain degree once you pull them out of the freezer.
I think onions are kind of the same too.
Okay. Well, onions, you really don't need to freeze onions. You got a 3 to 6 month shelf life on such a thing.
Right. So yeah, you can do that, or any vegetable you can also blanch it. Blanching is just basically the process of you take that vegetable however you want it, cut up, put it in boiling water for about a minute, and then you put it directly into an ice bath.
So back to the flipping. Why do people flip the jars upside down? Where is that coming from, and why is these people still doing it?
Okay, so it used to be for when people would line their jars with paraffin wax, and that would help seal the wax.
And make an airtight seal. Yeah, okay.
I don't know why they still do it.
Yeah, I am. I don't encourage social media bullying, but when you see that on there and everybody, hundreds of comments, this is not safe, don't do this, makes you kind of feel good inside.
I'm glad that gives you some sort of satisfaction.
Well, I mean, just like like April was saying in our previous segment, that we've got to learn how to do it correctly, otherwise we can get people sick.
Right.
And flipping a jar upside down to get it to seal by putting pressure on the lid is not, there's nothing, nowhere ever where that's a safe thing to do.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.